Greetings, this is Bread and Co-ops. So, hopefully you've watched part 1 of this video, or perhaps you're a rebel video watcher and the seemingly one-way nature of time displeases you. I don't personally care, as long as you do the thing with the like and the subscribe buttons. You know the thing. You clearly watch YouTube. Don't make me say it. Previously, we discussed very briefly the nature of Marxism as a way of analyzing history through class conflict. Now, let us actually analyze history through class conflict. Welcome to dialectical materialism, a term coined by Joseph Dietzken. God, I love German philosophy. Marx decided to break human history, well, European history, because Marx was a 19th century European, and that's just how 19th century Europeans generally roll, into various modes of production. So, follow me in part 2 of this Marxist-light view of history. Way back in the day, there existed the primitive communist state of hunter-gatherer societies. It's not really a mode of production, because there wasn't really complicated relationships between people yet, nor do they have the tools necessary to produce, nor do they have property to stratify their society. No large distinctions yet existed between who produces, who consumes, who profits, etc. This does change, of course. With the adaptation of agriculture and long-term settlements, social stratification and property accumulation begin to emerge. Eventually, this leads to currency, trade, and early forms of law. Increases in technology means surplus of goods, where not every day is a matter of survival for you and your community. So, yay, ancient mode of production. Sort of. There's also the whole slavery thing. This is sometimes called the slave mode of production, so let's not, totally ignore that fact. Now, picture Rome, with its patricians prospering off the work of plebeian farmers tied to a client system, along with, the literal slaves. Marx saw this as a dialectic, the patricians as a thesis, and the plebeians as an antithesis. But, as society changes and Rome fell, a synthesis was created, medieval feudal lords, who were thus the new thesis of a new feudal mode of production. So, picture post-Roman Europe. Under the feudal mode of production, these previous plebeians get to enter into nested contractual relations, and potentially even move up in society. Using your lord's land entitles you to some, but not all, of the product of your labor. Military service for your lord could grant you the promise of owning future land. An ecclesiastical career could grant you an education. Trade between different feudal communities could continue to create more and varied surplus. So, yay, feudal mode of production. It would kind of suck if you, getting dialectic again, as a manorial servant involved in these nested contractual relationships, wanted a life different than what your feudal lord would allow you to have, which, of course, is class conflict. How does that thesis and antithesis merge? Good question, but pause that thought. You might be thinking to yourself, but wait, what about, the entire rest of the world that didn't turn into a post-Roman feudal society? Marx eventually realized that maybe that section of world history was important and coined the Asiatic mode of production, where urban rulers held a monopoly on land and extracted surplus in the form of tribute from generally self-sufficient villages. He also said it was kind of a developmental dead end, and changing into other modes of production was generally impossible, and that's why the everlasting, unchanging Asiatic mode of production persists to this day in such countries as Vietnam, North Korea, China, and Russia. But back to the whole feudal lord manorial servant thing. Think about the English Civil Wars, or the American Revolution, or the French Revolution, at least the first half. Those unhappy manorial servants, hundreds of years later, educated, skilled as craftsmen, doctors, or lawyers, oppressed by the limitations of the feudal system, they advocate for freedom of speech, freedom of belief, property rights not dependent on the whim of lords who rule and control the means of production by birthright, a voice in government, a right to trade their goods based on market prices and not be subjected to the barriers of mercantilism. Eventually, the contradictions of the feudal mode of production give way to a new thesis and a new mode of production. These manorial servants of the old regime become the new thesis, the capitalist or the bourgeoisie. And this is the capitalist mode of production. Yay, capitalism! The capitalist mode of production, thus, is based on private ownership of the means of production by the aforementioned capitalists, who accumulate and risk capital, for instance by founding a company, building a factory, investing in a pre-existing company or factory, in order to provide tools and resources to the forces of labor. Said labor is provided by the urban working class or proletariat. And Marx generally only meant the urban working class. Peasants, farmers, rural workers, whatever, they don't really have a role in this mode of production, nor do they have revolutionary potential, as Marx would kind of call it. They're just the antiquated holdovers from the feudal mode that would presumably eventually join the proletariat, although a few of them would likely become landlords. Yeah. So, what is the inherent contradiction in the capitalist mode of production? It's the desire of the capitalist class to extract surplus value from the urban workers, to have them make as much as possible for as little as possible, versus the desire of the urban working class to thrive and exert autonomy. Marx uses the term alienation, describing the unfortunate situation in which people are removed from the fruits of their labor. Happy, autonomous people make a product, and they do a thing, like sell, trade, give away, whatever, their product. But due largely to the forces of industrialization, the proletariat do not get this experience. They don't make their own complete products, nor do they get to do the thing to those products. The urban factory workers, because they're effectively cogs in a human machine, are thus said to suffer from alienation. So, I guess that leads us to the juicy part of Marxism. Like, what happens when the inherent contradictions of the capitalist mode of production inevitably lead to its downfall, as has happened to all other previous modes of production? I don't know. It'd be cool if Marx told us, but he didn't. The gist seems to be this. A synthesis between capitalists and workers is impossible. The whole system needs to come down through revolution, and that revolution and transition will require a dictatorship of the proletariat. Quick aside, wow, it would have been great if he straight up defined dictatorship of the proletariat, but he didn't. He didn't actually invent the term either, and it's generally unclear whether or not it means a literal dictatorship of a handful of proletarians, or a vague reference to just the proletariat exclusively being in power. His analogies with the Paris Commune kind of imply the latter, but Lenin's theory of a revolutionary vanguard party has more historical precedent. Unfortunately. Eventually, the dictatorship of the proletariat, after taking control of the means of production from the capitalists and give them to the workers, will lead to the socialist mode of production. Then, after a while, all classes and states will vanish, we'll all live in a kick-ass utopia that we'll probably call communism, and the end. Hope you guys don't have any questions or anything. You might be thinking, like, well, was the USSR communist? Is China a communist? Did Marx adequately consider the evolution of the welfare state? And if you are, good. Those are good questions. Shane Marx isn't here to answer them. And since I'm not Marx, that's it for this episode of Bread and Co-ops. In the meantime, do the thing with the like and the subscribe, let me know what you want to talk about, and that is still a requirement, comrade.